Walter Hughes, a grieving veteran, faces humiliation when a bank teller mocks his folded flag ID, a symbol of his son's sacrifice in Afghanistan. The incident, captured on video, goes viral, sparking outrage among veterans and the public. As the bank scrambles to respond, Walter's quiet dignity contrasts with the chaos. 8 minutes after he leaves, military officials arrive, shutting down the branch for review. Who was this man, and what power did his simple card hold? The story unfolds, revealing a reckoning that will change the bank and community forever, leaving readers eager to discover the outcome. Join QH Incredible Stories to honor sacrifices like Walter's. Subscribe to hear powerful tales of resilience and respect, where every folded flag finds its voice. Support our mission to share stories that remind us to value dignity and service. Click subscribe and be part of remembering what matters. On a crisp Tuesday morning in 2025, Walter Hughes, a 74-year-old veteran, stepped into the downtown bank branch, his faded military jacket hanging loosely on his wiry frame. The lines etched into his weathered face told stories of resilience, each wrinkle a testament to years of silent endurance. Despite the ache in his legs, souvenirs of his service in military logistics, he held himself with the unyielding posture of a soldier, his shoulders squared against the weight of a world that had long since moved on. In his trembling hand, he clutched a small card, its edges frayed and one corner torn, bearing the solemn image of a folded American flag, a symbol of sacrifice that carried a weight few in the bustling bank could comprehend. The branch hummed with the restless energy of a long line of customers, their eyes glued to screens or darting impatiently to the clock, none sparing a glance for the elderly man whose quiet dignity seemed to belong to another era. When Walter's turn arrived, he approached the counter with measured steps, the faint limp in his gait a reminder of the cold morning air aggravating his old wounds. He placed the folded flag ID on the counter with care, as if it were a fragile heirloom, and spoke in a voice steady but soft. "I'm here for my monthly withdrawal, please." The words were a ritual, a monthly pilgrimage to honor the son he had lost, Lieutenant Mark Hughes, who fell in Afghanistan in 2011. The young teller, her eyes framed with sharp lines of mascara, barely glanced at him before picking up the card. Her lips twisted into a smirk, her nose wrinkling at the card's worn appearance. "We don't accept crumpled cards here, old man," she said, her tone sharp with condescension. "Is this some kind of joke?" Her laughter sliced through the bank's sterile air, drawing the attention of nearby customers who turned to watch the scene unfold. A man in a tailored suit behind Walter joined in, his chuckle dripping with smugness. "Flag collector, huh? Go to a museum," he taunted, his words landing like a blow to Walter's chest, though his face remained impassive. The line of customers offered no defense. Instead, a woman in a rush snapped, "Move aside, I'm late for work," her voice thick with irritation. Walter stood his ground, his eyes steady as he replied, "This is my son's ID. He fell in Afghanistan." His voice, though quiet, carried the weight of a grief he had carried for over a decade, a grief that should have silenced the room. But the teller's indifference was unshaken. A security guard approached, his tone polite but firm. "If you don't have a real ID, please step aside," he whispered, his words more about protocol than compassion. The teller tossed the card back across the counter, its faint thud a final dismissal. Walter's hand trembled as he retrieved it, his lips pressing into a tight line, though his gaze held firm, a silent rebuke to the room's callousness. As he turned to leave, Walter paused at the bank's entrance, his eyes lifting to the sign overhead. "Home of Real Service." The words, bold and gleaming, felt like a cruel jest. Once he had believed in such promises, in a world that honored sacrifice, but now they rang hollow, a relic of a time long gone. Inside, the teller had already moved on, calling next with a chirpy efficiency, her mind erased of the man she had just dismissed. In the line, an older woman clutched her banking slip, her fingers tightening as a quiet unease stirred within her. She had watched the exchange, her heart urging her to speak, to defend the man whose dignity had been so casually trampled. But the moment had slipped away, and now she stood in silence, her discomfort a faint shadow of the shame she couldn't name. Outside, Walter stood on the sidewalk, the morning sun casting a warm glow on his lined face. His hand rested protectively over the pocket where he had tucked the card, as if shielding his son's memory from the world's indifference. His expression was not one of anger, but of resolve, a determination forged in decades of carrying grief with grace. Inside the bank, no one could have known that in just 8 minutes their world of polished efficiency would be upended, forced to confront the weight of a man's quiet sacrifice. Walter lived alone in a modest suburban home, its faded curtains and worn furniture a shrine to a family long gone. His wife had succumbed to cancer years ago, leaving behind a silence that echoed in the empty rooms once filled with laughter. Yet Walter carried on, his grief a silent companion he bore without complaint, each day a testament to the strength that had carried him through wars and losses. In his youth, Walter had served in military logistics, earning 2 honorable discharges and legs that ached in the cold, a constant reminder of battles forgotten by most. But the deepest wound was the folded flag presented to him by the president when Mark, his son, fell in Afghanistan. Mark, an Air Force officer with a distinguished record, had volunteered for a dangerous evacuation mission, piloting a helicopter to rescue wounded soldiers. When it was shot down, his courage became his legacy, and Walter's pride in his son was matched only by the pain he buried deep within. At Mark's funeral, Walter had allowed himself one moment of raw grief, a single tear shed before he sealed his pain away, never speaking of it again. The folded flag ID, issued to Gold Star families, was more than a card. It was a piece of Mark's sacrifice, a badge of honor Walter carried with quiet pride. He rarely used its privileges, but each month he brought it to the bank for his military benefits, a ritual that kept his son's memory alive. Today was different. The bank, transformed by a corporate overhaul, prioritized efficiency over empathy. Its young staff, trained to process transactions with mechanical precision, had no knowledge of the folded flag's significance. The branch's sleek design felt cold to Walter, a stark contrast to the days when tellers knew their customers' stories. As he stood outside, the weight of the morning's encounter settled into his bones, not as anger, but as a quiet resolve to carry on, as he always had. Inside, the teller continued her work, oblivious to the storm about to descend. 8 minutes later, the bank manager locked the doors, his face pale as he whispered, "Headquarters is sending time because of him." Who was this man, and what had he done to halt an entire bank? The answer lay not in Walter's actions that morning, but in the legacy of sacrifice he carried, a legacy that would soon force everyone in that branch to confront the true meaning of service. In the small, weathered bank branch where Walter had been a loyal customer for years, the air had grown cold and distant since Jim Collins, the former manager, left 6 months ago. Jim had always greeted Walter with a warm handshake, his voice carrying genuine care as he asked, "Anything you need, sir? We're honored to serve you today." Those words had made Walter feel seen, not just as a customer, but as a man whose life was etched with sacrifice. Now the new staff barely glanced his way. Their interactions were mechanical, their words clipped, their eyes dismissive, as if Walter were nothing more than a number to process. To them, he wasn't a veteran carrying the weight of loss, a man whose heart bore scars from wars fought and a son buried. He was just another transaction. One afternoon, Walter approached the counter, clutching his folded flag ID card, a small, weathered symbol of his son Mark's ultimate sacrifice. The teller smirked, exchanging a mocking glance with a colleague. Their laughter, though quiet, cut through Walter like a blade. He stood there, his hands trembling slightly, not from anger, but from a deep, aching disappointment. He'd never asked for pity or praise, only the basic respect his son had died to defend. A customer nearby, unnoticed by the staff, captured the moment on their phone. Within minutes, the video was posted online with a caption that burned with righteous anger. "What happened to our respect? This is how we treat families who sacrificed everything." The post exploded across social media, shared hundreds, then thousands of times in just 7 minutes. Veterans groups from across the nation tagged the bank's official accounts, their comments a mix of fury and heartbreak. The video spread like wildfire through military forums, each share amplifying the collective outrage. The local Veterans Association recognized Walter instantly. He was a quiet fixture at their memorial services, always present but rarely speaking, his grief a silent companion. They forwarded the video to the city council, the state governor's office, and even the Department of Defense. Retired generals, their own hearts heavy with memories of fallen comrades, shared the post, their words sharp with condemnation. A senator, a former Marine, picked up the phone and dialed the bank's corporate headquarters, his voice steady but laced with fury. The bank's leadership, inundated with protest emails and the damning video, acted swiftly. They contacted the branch, ordering an immediate review of all personnel and locking the doors. "We're sending a team in 8 minutes," they declared. At home, Walter sat in his modest living room, the weight of the day pressing against his chest. The mantel above his fireplace told the story of his life. A photo of his son Mark, standing proud in his uniform beside his aircraft, his smile full of youthful promise. Walter's own service photos from decades past, faded but cherished, and a picture of his late wife, her face radiant on their last anniversary before cancer stole her away. Beside these memories rested a triangular case holding a folded flag, the one presented at Mark's funeral, and Mark's medals, a Purple Heart and a Silver Star, awarded posthumously for courage that still brought tears to Walter's eyes. He gently placed his folded flag ID next to the case, his fingers lingering on the worn edges. He didn't want fanfare or special treatment. All he wanted was what Mark had died for: respect for the fundamental dignity of every person. Those 8 minutes after he left the bank felt eternal, each second heavy with the sting of humiliation. Exactly 8 minutes later, 2 black SUVs adorned with military emblems screeched to a stop in front of the bank. The branch manager's face paled as Colonel Robert Morris, personnel director at the Department of Defense, stepped inside, flanked by a group in crisp military uniforms. The colonel's presence was commanding yet calm, his eyes carrying the weight of authority and disappointment. He requested an immediate halt to all transactions and asked customers to leave. The staff were ushered into a private conference room, their nervous glances darting between one another. Colonel Morris stood before them, his voice steady but firm. "You laughed at a folded flag," he said, each word deliberate. "That flag represents families who paid the ultimate price for your freedom to stand here." The video played on the conference room screen, its grainy footage exposing their callousness. The teller, who had smirked, began to sob, her apologies stumbling out in broken whispers. The security guard, usually stoic, bowed his head, his hands clasped tightly. The manager, voice shaking, read a formal statement. "On behalf of this branch, we apologize for failing to honor those who gave everything." Colonel Morris didn't raise his voice or lash out. His quiet disappointment was far more piercing. He posted a notice on the branch's front door. "This branch is closed for personnel review. All employees will undergo veteran service training before reopening." Outside, a small crowd gathered, drawn by curiosity and whispers of the unfolding drama. A group of young adults, moved by the story, arrived with flowers and candles, placing them gently by the door beneath the words, "Honor the Fallen." Their silent tribute was a stark contrast to the bank's earlier indifference. Meanwhile, Walter remained at home, unaware of the storm his quiet dignity had unleashed. By afternoon, a bank employee, her face etched with shame, arrived at his doorstep. She carried an official letter of apology and a bouquet in red, white, and blue. Her voice broke as she spoke. "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't understand what that card meant. I promise it'll never happen again." Walter looked at her, his eyes kind but weary. He placed his folded flag ID on the table between them. "You don't have to be a soldier to show respect," he said softly. "You just have to remember." That night, the story spread further, shared thousands of times across the country. Each share carried Walter's quiet strength, a reminder of the cost of freedom and the power of dignity. Colonel Morris stood rigid before a cluster of news cameras, their lenses glinting under the midday sun outside the shuttered bank. His voice, steady yet heavy with a restrained emotion, cut through the murmurs of the gathered crowd. "What unfolded here today reveals a profound failure to grasp the weight of sacrifice," he said, his gaze unwavering. "That folded flag isn't just fabric. It's a symbol of a family forever fractured, a life given for others." His words carried the ache of someone who had seen too many such flags, each one a testament to a wound that never fully heals. Behind his composed exterior, Morris wrestled with a quiet fury. Not at the teller who had sparked this storm, but at a society that seemed to have misplaced its reverence for those who paid the ultimate price. Inside the bank, now eerily silent with its doors locked, the young teller sat alone in the break room, her phone casting a harsh glow on her face. She scrolled through an endless stream of comments, each one a fresh stab of guilt. One message seared itself into her mind. My brother died so you could have the freedom to mock his memory. Her hands trembled as she read it, her heart sinking under the weight of her careless words. She hadn't meant to offend, hadn't thought her flippant remark about the folded flag would spiral into this, a public outcry that now defined her. Tears welled in her eyes, not just from shame, but from the dawning realization of what that flag truly meant to someone like Walter, the man at the center of it all. By dusk, the bank's regional director arrived, his face etched with urgency. He gathered the staff in a cramped meeting room, the air thick with tension. This isn't just a PR crisis, he said, his voice firm but tinged with a rare vulnerability. This is about who we are as people, as Americans. We've lost sight of something sacred, something fundamental. His words hung heavy, and he felt a pang of responsibility. Not just for the bank's image, but for failing to instill in his team a deeper respect for the sacrifices that undergird their everyday freedoms. He vowed silently to make this right, not for the cameras, but for the families who carried the quiet burden of loss. Meanwhile, Walter's phone buzzed incessantly. Neighbors, local news, veterans groups, all clamoring for his voice. He let it ring, each unanswered call a small act of defiance against the chaos. When a reporter appeared at his door, her notepad poised like a weapon, Walter offered only a gentle refusal. This isn't about me, he said softly, his voice steady but thick with unspoken grief. It's about remembering what matters. He closed the door, retreating to the solitude of his modest home, where memories of his son, Mark, lingered in every corner. The weight of his loss was a constant companion, yet Walter carried it with a quiet dignity, as if honoring his son required no fanfare, only steadfast remembrance. The next morning, a crowd gathered outside Walter's home, not with anger, but with reverence. Families of fallen soldiers, veterans, and ordinary citizens stood in silence, their small American flags fluttering in the breeze. Walter stepped onto his porch, his heart catching at the sight. These weren't strangers. They were people who understood, who carried their own scars of sacrifice. A young man in uniform, a comrade from Mark's unit, stepped forward, his hand extended. Sir, we never forgot, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. And now neither will they. Walter's eyes misted as he clasped the young man's hand, a fleeting moment of connection that felt like a tether to his son's memory. In that handshake, he felt the weight of shared loss and unspoken pride. By noon, the bank's headquarters issued a statement, their words carefully chosen but sincere. They announced a new company-wide policy to honor military families and veterans, effective immediately. The branch would remain closed for a week, its staff undergoing mandatory training to understand the depth of sacrifice behind every folded flag. The teller, her heart heavy with regret, issued her own public apology. I failed to honor something sacred, she wrote, her words raw with shame. I'm deeply sorry and committed to making this right. Each syllable was a step toward redemption, a promise to herself and to Walter that she would never again overlook the human cost of the symbols she once dismissed. Walter, however, turned away from the news. He didn't read the comments, didn't watch the coverage. Instead, he knelt in his garden, his hands sinking into the cool earth as he tended to his flowers. This was his quiet duty, a daily ritual of nurturing life that mirrored the way he honored Mark's sacrifice, through steady, unspoken devotion. Each bloom he coaxed from the soil felt like a small act of defiance against grief, a way to keep living in a world that felt all emptier without his son. A month later, the bank reopened, its entrance now bearing a new sign. Every folded flag is a silent story. Thank you for your sacrifice. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that resonated with every visitor. When Walter returned to withdraw his benefits, the entire staff stood, their smiles warm with respect. The manager, transformed by the training, personally escorted him to a private office where transactions were handled with care and dignity, no rush, no indifference. The bank had established a dedicated line for veterans and Gold Star families, ensuring they were never left waiting. On one wall, photos of local fallen heroes hung in quiet tribute, with Mark's picture at the center. A constant reminder of the lives behind the flags. Walter's heart stirred as he saw his son's face, a bittersweet ache mingling with pride. On that first visit, the teller who had mocked him approached, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. Walter looked at her, his gaze kind but unflinching. "We all have moments when we fail to see what matters," he said gently. "What counts is how we change afterward." His forgiveness was immediate, a gift born of his own quiet strength, and it left the teller with a renewed sense of purpose. One day a young boy entered the bank with his father, his eyes catching on Mark's photo on the wall. "Dad, who is that man?" he asked, pointing. His father knelt beside him, his voice soft but firm. "He's a father who lost a son. The bravest people are sometimes the quietest." The boy nodded, his young mind grappling with the weight of those words, planting a seed of respect that would grow with time. Walter became an unwitting symbol of grace at the local Veterans Memorial Ceremony, where he was invited as the guest of honor. When asked to speak, he offered just one sentence: "Real honor is silent, but it never dies." His words, though brief, carried the weight of a lifetime of love and loss, resonating with everyone present. Students from a nearby school sent him thank you cards, their handwritten notes filled with gratitude for a man they'd never met, but whose story touched them deeply. A young woman, once a teller at the bank, wrote a letter of her own. "I will always remember what you taught me without saying a word." Her words were a quiet vow to carry forward the lesson of respect Walter embodied. The community, moved by Walter's quiet strength, established the Honor the Fallen Fund, an annual initiative to provide flowers for the graves of local heroes. Each bouquet was a small gesture, but to Walter it was a continuation of the silent duty he performed every day, honoring life, honoring sacrifice, and ensuring that no one's story was ever forgotten. On Memorial Day, the local bank emerged as a beacon of generosity, pledging a portion of its annual profits to support veterans' causes and their families. This commitment wasn't just a corporate gesture, it carried the weight of a community's newfound understanding, sparked by an incident that had rippled far beyond the small town's borders. What began as a moment of misunderstanding had blossomed into a nationwide dialogue about the importance of honoring military symbols and paying tribute to Gold Star families, those who had lost loved ones in service. The incident became a cornerstone for change, inspiring training programs across businesses nationwide. These programs used the bank's story as a vivid case study in customer service, respect, and the quiet power of empathy. 6 months after the incident, the teller who had once carelessly mocked Walter found herself standing before a packed auditorium at a financial industry conference. Her presentation, titled "The Day I Failed to See Honor," was more than a speech. It was a confession, a reckoning, and a vow to do better. She spoke with raw honesty about her mistake, her voice trembling as she recounted the moment she failed to recognize the weight of Walter's folded flag. The audience, a sea of suits and ties, sat in stunned silence, some wiping tears from their eyes. For the teller, whose name was Sarah, that day had been a turning point. She had spent sleepless nights replaying the encounter, her initial defensiveness giving way to shame, then to a fierce determination to learn and grow. She pored over stories of military sacrifice, spoke with veterans, and listened to Gold Star families, each conversation chiseling away at her ignorance. Her presentation wasn't just a professional obligation. It was a deeply personal mission to ensure others wouldn't repeat her mistake. By the end, her words had transformed her from a small-town teller into an advocate for respect, her vulnerability resonating with everyone in the room. Walter, meanwhile, continued his life with the same quiet rhythm that had always defined him. Each morning he walked to the bank, then to the grocery store, and later tended to his garden, where he found solace among the roses and marigolds. But something had shifted in the town around him. People who once passed him without a second glance now recognized him, offering nods of respect or soft smiles as he shuffled by with his worn cap and steady gait. Children, curious and unafraid, sometimes approached him asking about the son he had lost. At first, Walter hesitated, the pain of Mark's absence still a heavy stone in his chest. But their wide-eyed sincerity softened him, and he began to share stories he'd kept locked away for years. Stories of Mark's laughter, his bravery, his love for late-night talks under the stars. Each word felt like a small release, a way to keep his son's memory alive. Walter wasn't one for attention, but he found unexpected comfort in these moments, as if the town's newfound respect had given him permission to grieve openly. On the anniversary of Mark's death, Walter made his annual pilgrimage to the cemetery, his heart heavy with the familiar ache. He expected the usual solitude, the quiet ritual of placing flowers at Mark's grave. But this time as he approached, he stopped short. The grave was already adorned with a vibrant bouquet of fresh flowers, their colors bright against the gray stone. A note written in careful handwriting rested among the petals. "From your friends at the bank, we remember." Walter's throat tightened, and for a moment he stood motionless, his eyes tracing the familiar name etched into the headstone. The gesture wasn't grand, but it was profound. The bank employees, once oblivious to the significance of his loss, had taken the time to honor Mark. They had learned what a folded flag truly meant. Not just a symbol, but a story of love, loss, and sacrifice. Walter pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the weight of their kindness settle alongside his grief. Word of Walter's story spread, catching the attention of a television producer who saw in it the potential for a powerful documentary. He approached Walter with a gentle pitch, asking to share his experience with the world. Walter listened quietly, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes distant but kind. After a long pause, he shook his head. "The story isn't about me," he said softly, his voice steady but firm. "It's about remembering what each folded flag means." The producer, moved by Walter's humility, shifted his focus. Instead of a film centered on one man, he created a documentary about the broader significance of military symbols and traditions. The flags, the ceremonies, the quiet acts of remembrance that bind communities together. Walter agreed to appear briefly, sharing a few words about Mark and the importance of honoring those who serve. At the premiere, he sat in the back row, unnoticed by most, his weathered hands resting on his knees. As the credits rolled, the audience rose to their feet, their applause thunderous. But it wasn't for the film alone, it was for Walter, for the quiet strength he carried, for the lesson he had unknowingly taught a town, a bank, and beyond. Walter stood too, clapping not for himself but for the filmmaker who had amplified a truth he'd always known. That honor lives in remembrance, not in fanfare. Not every hero's story ends with medals or public acclaim. Some, like Walter, are remembered through the quiet dignity of a folded flag, a father's steadfast love, and the stories etched into his heart. When respect falters, justice has a way of stepping in, sometimes with a force louder than words. In that small town, an entire community learned the true meaning of service, not the kind advertised on a bank sign, but the kind that sees the person behind the transaction, the story behind the silence. The bank sign still proclaimed, "Home of real service." But now those words carried weight. The employees, from tellers to managers, had been trained to look beyond ID cards and account numbers, to recognize the symbols of sacrifice some customers carried. For Walter, and for all who serve in silence, the phrase was no longer a hollow slogan. It was a promise kept, a commitment to honor every sacrifice, every story, every folded flag.